God's wife, the untold story of Asherah. Did you know that God might have had a wife? The goddess Asherah was once worshipped alongside God, though for many years her very existence was denied by historians and Bible scholars. However, the discovery of the Ugaritic texts in 1929 changed everything. These ancient writings revealed a rich mythology surrounding Asherah and confirmed that the biblical references to her were indeed about the same goddess. The Ugaritic tablets provided undeniable proof of a pre-biblical Canaanite pantheon, which included not only gods like Baal and Dagon, but also the high god of Israel, El. Asherah, it turns out, was El's wife and a significant deity in her own right. Asherah's origins stretch back even further than Ugarit. Her name appears in inscriptions from the Hittite Empire, Syria, Mesopotamia, and Arabia. But it was in Israel where Asherah truly found a home and a place in the hearts of the people. She wasn't just a Canaanite goddess, she was deeply embedded in Israelite worship. Both the Bible and archaeology leave clues about her role in Israel's religious practices, including worship in the Jerusalem temple. Some elements of Asherah's worship have been hidden in plain sight, concealed by scribes and theological stories that sought to erase her presence. Join us as we explore the rich history of Asherah, her origins, the lands where she was revered, and the surprising places in Scripture where her legacy still lingers. Asher, one of the most ancient goddesses, traces her origins to Mesopotamia, where she was called Ashru or Asham. She was the revered consort of Amuru, the Babylonian god who symbolized the West, and was known as the Lord of the Mountain. Like her husband, Asher was connected to both the rugged steppe-lands of the Amorites and the mountains. She held the title Lady of the Steppe, highlighting her Amorite heritage. In ancient Babylon, Asher was highly venerated, especially during the First Babylonian dynasty, which was ruled by Hammurabi, an Amorite himself. She had her own temple and dedicated priests, and her name appeared in personal names as a theophoric element, signifying her deep cultural importance. Her worship extended well into the Hellenistic period, where she was sometimes associated with Ishtar and the underworld. Asher's influence was not limited to Babylon. In her homeland, she was called Asherah, as seen in the name of the Amorite ruler Abdi Asherah, meaning servant of Asherah. Her significance is documented in 14th-century diplomatic letters between Egypt and Near Eastern kings. Asher also played a prominent role in the Hittite El-Kunirsa myth, a tale of seduction, betrayal, and resurrection involving the storm god Baal. This myth, likely borrowed from the Canaanites, underscores her widespread reverence in the ancient world. Her influence even reached pre-Islamic Arabia, where she was known as At. She shared temples with other deities like Wad and Am, both lunar gods, leading to speculation that Asher may have been their solar counterpart. Although her early history is shrouded in mystery, Asher's legacy as a powerful goddess and creatrix of gods endures across multiple ancient cultures. Asherah, a prominent deity in the ancient Levant, truly came into her own through discoveries like the Ugaritic tablets at Ras Shamra. These findings have given us a clearer picture of who Asherah was and her significant role in Canaanite religion. Known as Ayat in Ugarit, Asherah was the consort of the supreme god El, sometimes referred to as Elat, meaning goddess. She played a pivotal role in the divine hierarchy, even receiving sacrificial offerings, particularly sheep, as seen in Ugaritic texts. While El was credited with creating the heavens, earth, and mankind, Asherah was instrumental in the creation of the gods themselves, earning the title Creatrix of the Gods. Asherah was also referred to as Lady of the Sea in some texts, underscoring her role as a goddess of Tyre. During the Late Bronze Age, numerous seals and figurines depicted her, often reflecting Egyptian influences, such as holding lotus flowers or papyrus stems. She was sometimes portrayed standing on a lion, symbolizing her power and status. Asherah was closely associated with fertility, with her images often highlighting her pubic triangle alongside the tree of life symbol. Over time, Asherah's representation evolved, with her often being symbolized by a stylized tree, frequently flanked by ibexes or other animals. This imagery suggested a shift in focus from fertility to nourishment and blessings. A well-known jug from a temple in Lachish is decorated with a tree flanked by caprids, with an inscription dedicating it to My Lady Elat, indicating her importance. Pendants shaped like stylized trees, found in the same temple, were likely worn as symbols of Asherah, much like modern religious jewelry. In Israel, 2 cult stands from the village of Tanakh depict a sacred tree flanked by animals, with one showing Asherah herself flanked by lions. These artifacts, dating to the early Israelite monarchy, suggest a local cult dedicated to Asherah. Even in the later Iron Age, Asherah continued to be venerated in Israel and Judah. Seals from the region show sacred trees flanked by worshippers. Terracotta plaques depict a naked goddess believed to be Asherah, and countless pillar-shaped goddess figurines, though their purpose remains debated, are thought to represent her. Some of the most compelling evidence of Asherah's worship during this period comes from a caravanserai, offering critical insights into her enduring significance in the ancient Near East. Just south of Judah lies a location called Kaneh Adud, which was once a bustling trade route. Archaeologists discovered fragments of 2 large storage jars, known as PO, that have caught the attention of historians. These pieces showcase fascinating illustrations and inscriptions. One jar features a sacred tree adorned with flowers and possibly fruit, with 2 goats feeding on it while a lion rests below. This image is believed to symbolize the goddess Asherah. What's even more intriguing is that some shards were repurposed for writing messages. These inscriptions include blessings in the names of Yahweh and Asherah. 2 of the writings refer to Yahweh of Teman, and another mentions Yahweh of Samaria, suggesting that the travelers who left these messages were familiar with worship practices at Yahweh's temples in those regions. Another inscription is placed above an illustration of a god and goddess with divine features. Scholars still debate whether the positioning of the image and the inscription was deliberate or coincidental. In addition, a 4th inscription referencing Yahweh and Asherah was found on a piece of wall plaster at the site. A similar blessing, invoking Yahweh and his Asherah, was discovered at a site in Judah called Kirbet el-Kom. According to Old Testament scholar Nick Wyatt, the goddess Asherah was closely associated with the royal families of Israel and Judah, which is why she frequently appears in narratives about royal politics. Wyatt even speculates that the Queen Mother may have been viewed as an earthly embodiment of the goddess. It's important to remember that the Bible doesn't always give a clear picture of ancient Israelite religion. Many references to Asherah in the Old Testament come from texts associated with the Deuteronomist, a post-exilic theological group that pushed for the exclusive worship of Yahweh. Their understanding of past religious practices, especially before the exile, was limited, as pointed out by scholar Tilda Binger. The Bible's references to Asherah are also challenging to interpret due to textual corruption, with significant differences between the Hebrew texts we use today and the ancient Greek translations. One notable mention of Asherah involves King Asa of Judah in 1 Kings 15 and 2 Chronicles 15. The Hebrew texts say that Asa removed his mother, Maacah, from her role as palace administrator because she had made an image of Asherah, which Asa then burned by the brook of Kidron. However, the Greek translations of these passages tell a different story. In 1 Kings, Asa's mother is named Anna, and the images are described differently. In 2 Chronicles, Maacah is retained as the mother's name. but it says she served the goddess Astarte instead of Asherah. Binger suggests that this wasn't merely a religious reform, but a political power struggle, with Makkah's true offence being her worship of Astarte over Asherah, Yahweh's official consort. Another well-known reference is the story of the 400 prophets of Asherah in 1 Kings 18:19. The passage describes a confrontation on Mount Carmel, where the prophets of Baal and Asherah dined at Queen Jezebel's table. Scholars believe that the mention of Asherah's prophets was added later, indicating that she still held some prominence during the time of the Deuteronomists. Adding her prophets to this story may have been a way for the Deuteronomists to discredit Asherah's legacy, associating her with the despised Baal and Jezebel. Finally, King Manasseh's reforms also play into the decline of Asherah worship. The rulers of Judah made efforts to centralize worship around Yahweh, gradually diminishing the influence of Asherah in the religious life of the kingdom. Manasseh, the Judahite king, made sweeping reforms in the temple, and unlike other evil kings, who are simply said to have displeased Yahweh, 2 Kings 21 gives a detailed account of his actions. Manasseh rebuilt the high places, set up altars for the hosts of heaven, likely referencing the Canaanite pantheon, and even placed an image of the goddess Asherah inside Yahweh's temple. This account starts with a verb that usually signals the reintroduction of proper worship, leading some, like scholar Binger, to suggest that earlier texts might have viewed Manasseh's actions more favorably. They theorize that Manasseh believed he was correcting his father Hezekiah's mistakes by restoring Asherah's place in the temple. His long reign of 55 years suggests he may have been a popular and effective ruler, and in fact, 2 Chronicles rehabilitates his reputation, telling a story of his capture by the Assyrians, his repentance, and eventual restoration, something absent in 2 Kings. In contrast, Josiah, Manasseh's grandson, brought about a series of drastic counter-reforms. According to 2 Kings 23, Josiah removed and burned items dedicated to Baal, Asherah, and the hosts of heaven. He also dismantled the houses of the Kesim in the temple, where women wove fabric for Asherah. The word Kesim is often mistranslated as prostitutes, but its root in Hebrew means holy or sanctified, likely referring to cultic personnel involved in worship practices not exclusive to Yahweh. Contrary to popular belief, there's no strong evidence that prostitution was part of Asherah worship. Scholars like Susan Ackerman suggest that Asherah was associated with weaving and spinning. In fact, in ancient myths, Asherah is portrayed as holding a spindle, and biblical depictions of wisdom in Proverbs seem to echo this imagery, likening her to a weaver and seamstress present with Yahweh at creation. Archaeological finds, such as loom weights discovered at sanctuaries linked to Asherah, indicate that textile production was often connected to her worship. It's possible that the Jerusalem temple itself housed a textile production center under the oversight of Asherah's cult. Despite the reforms supposedly carried out by King Josiah, it seems that the legacy of Asherah, a goddess once venerated in ancient Israel, never fully disappeared. Interestingly, 2 key objects in the temple, which are often associated with proper worship of Yahweh in the Old Testament, might have actually originated from the worship of Asherah. First, it's important to note that many of the 40-plus references to Asherah in the Bible don't directly refer to the goddess herself, but rather to cultic objects known as Asherim that were linked to her. Scholars still debate what these objects actually were, but they likely resembled stylized trees or poles, or perhaps even real trees that had been specially pruned. We know they were made of wood and stood upright, as many biblical passages mention cutting them down and burning them. Unfortunately, because wood doesn't last for long periods, no surviving examples of these Asherim have been found by archaeologists. However, we do have some ancient depictions of similar objects. A Greek vase, for example, shows an altar with a palm branch, and a Tyrian coin features two standing stones with an ornamental tree. Many sacred trees seen in Israelite inscriptions may also represent these Asherim, like a 7-branched tree with almond-shaped fruit that was found on a storage jar at Kuntilet Ajrut. There's also evidence suggesting that these Asherim may have been placed in the Jerusalem temple, perhaps even near the inner sanctuary. Deuteronomy 16 explicitly forbids placing an Asherah next to Yahweh's altar, saying, "You shall not plant any tree as an Asherah beside the altar of Yahweh your God." This shows how intertwined Asherah worship was with Israelite religious practices, even in places dedicated to Yahweh. Now, let's consider the menorah. The story of its origin in Exodus 25 describes a 7-branched lampstand made of gold and decorated with almond flowers, a design that scholars believe may have been intentionally modeled after an almond tree to suppress or counter the worship of Asherah. In a significant study published in 1971, L. Yarden suggested that this design was a subtle way of combating Asherah's influence, implying that her worship was still prevalent during the early Second Temple period. This connection between the menorah, almonds, and the Tree of Life highlights the complex and intertwined nature of Israelite religious traditions, where the veneration of Asherah was difficult to fully erase despite ongoing reforms. In the Near East, the almond tree is one of the first trees to blossom in spring. In Israel, it blooms as early as January or February, while most other trees are still bare. Since ancient times, this tree has been associated with the mother goddess. Its Latin name, amygdala, likely comes from the Aramaic word amalu, meaning great mother. In biblical Hebrew, the almond tree was called Luz, a name still used in Arabic today. Interestingly, Luz is also the name of the place where Jacob had his famous dream of a ladder reaching to heaven in Genesis 28. After waking from this dream, Jacob set up a sacred stone and named the place Bethel, the house of El, God. In the Bronze Age, Bethel was an important religious site, likely dedicated to a goddess, possibly Asherah. Archaeologists have found plaques of goddesses and a Hathor column here. Jacob's story added legitimacy to Bethel's spiritual significance. Later, the Ark of the Covenant is said to have rested at Bethel on its way to Shiloh. Even in 2 Kings 23:15, there's mention of an Asherah pole at the Bethel altar during the late monarchy. Interestingly, prophets like Amos and Hosea didn't condemn the Asherah pole at Bethel, suggesting that it might have been considered an acceptable part of Yahweh's worship at the time. Scholars believe that the Israelite version of the Asherah pole could have been a sacred living almond tree or a wooden pole made from an almond tree. While later religious reforms in Israel did away with Asherah worship, they kept her symbol alive, the stylized almond tree with 7 branches, echoing the menorah used in the Second Temple. This connection highlights the almond tree's enduring cultural and spiritual significance throughout Israel's history. Aaron's flowering staff, a symbol of divine authority. The Bible gives special attention to almond trees, and their significance goes deeper than you might think. In the book of Jeremiah, the prophet sees an almond rod, prompting God to make a powerful connection. God asked Jeremiah, "What do you see?" Jeremiah responds, "I see a rod of almond." To this God replies, "You have seen correctly, for I am watching over my word to fulfill it." The Hebrew word for almond, shaked, ties to the idea of watching or being vigilant, creating a meaningful play on words. But this wasn't just any almond rod. It may have been a specific one with a miraculous origin. In Numbers 17, we find a story of a divine sign through a botanical wonder. God instructs Moses to collect a staff from each tribe and place them before the Ark of the Covenant. The next day, only one staff had blossomed, Aaron's. His staff produced buds, blossoms, and ripe almonds overnight. This miraculous transformation wasn't just a one-time sign. Aaron's blossoming staff was kept in front of the ark as a lasting symbol for those who doubted God's authority. Many scholars believe that this story served to explain an object already familiar to the people: a flowering staff kept in the temple sanctuary. Old Testament scholar Carol Leander Torn suggests that the temple, much like medieval cathedrals, housed objects of religious significance, including this staff, which would have been stylized with almond flowers. This miraculous staff, representing divine authority, became associated with Aaron, establishing his priestly line and the privileges of the priests who followed him. Over time, Aaron's staff symbolized much more than just a rod. It was a powerful representation of divine endorsement and authority in the temple, passed down through generations of priests. In ancient Israelite religion, the concept of the Asherah, a stylized tree often associated with divine blessings, played a significant role. Some scholars believe that a particular drawing found at Khirbet el-Kom might depict an Asherah set up by King Ahab in Samaria, suggesting it still existed in the temple when the drawing was created. Notably, the name Asherah appears in inscriptions alongside blessings similar to those found in the Aaronic blessings from the Book of Numbers. This connection hints at Asherah's role as a mediator for Yahweh's blessings, symbolized by the tree motif representing nourishment and divine favor. Although certain biblical texts condemn idols and standing stones, Asherim, sacred poles or trees, are notably absent from these critiques. Even the prophet Ezekiel, known for condemning high places and altars, never mentions the Asherim. This omission suggests that the Asherah and its almond tree symbolism may have continued to hold significance in post-exilic temple practices and among the Aaronic priesthood, even as official temple ideology evolved. However, despite her important role, Asherah eventually fell out of favor in Israelite worship. A fascinating analysis by W.D. Witt of the Book of Hosea suggests that the text originally described Yahweh's divorce from Asherah. Hosea is known for its complex and layered revisions, making it difficult to interpret. Chapter 2 contains a dramatic speech in which Yahweh, in the role of a husband, declares a divorce. "Defend your mother, for she is no longer my wife, and I am no longer her husband." Witt argues that this speech may not originally have been about Israel, as later revisions suggest, but rather about Yahweh's separation from Asherah. In the metaphor, Asherah is portrayed as Yahweh's wife, and her role as a fertility goddess explains the abundance of fertility imagery in Hosea. As Asherah was seen as the mother goddess and Yahweh's divine consort, she was also regarded as the mother of the Israelites, just as Yahweh was seen as their father. The sin of Israel, according to Hosea, was adopting fertility rites where Asherah was depicted as Baal's sexual partner, leading to a breakdown in the divine relationship. This interpretation adds a deeper layer of understanding to Israelite religion, suggesting that the eventual decline of Asherah's worship may have been connected to changes in religious views over time. Reinterpreting ancient texts, the story of Asherah and Israel's faith. In ancient Israel, the worship of other deities alongside Yahweh often led to complex religious dynamics. Hosea 2:4 speaks of the consequences when the people of Israel turned away from Yahweh, committing spiritual adultery by worshipping Baal and other gods. As a result, they became estranged, much like the metaphor of children born outside of marriage. The passage also points to the punishment of Asherah, symbolically stripping her of her favored status and sacred symbols. Hosea's condemnation was likely not directed at the Jerusalem temple, but at the temple in Gilgal. This site held religious significance, and Hosea may have been trying to explain the loss of Gilgal and the province of Megiddo to the Assyrians during the 8th century BC. Asherah's presence in ancient worship. Even as the Hebrew Bible was being written, traces of Asherah's influence remained. Over time, scribes attempted to remove references to her, but some evidence persists. For instance, Francesca Stavrakopoulou, in a 2011 documentary, suggested that certain biblical passages, like Deuteronomy 33:2, might have originally referenced Asherah. In this verse, the Hebrew text describes Yahweh with a fiery law in his right hand, a phrase that seems out of place. Stavrokopoulou argues that the original wording may have referred to Asherah instead, with slight changes in the text over time leading to confusion. Another mysterious reference can be found in Ezekiel 8, where the prophet has a vision of the image of jealousy in the temple courts, a figure that provoked divine anger. Margaret Barker, a biblical scholar, argues that this image was originally a representation of Asherah, who was venerated alongside Yahweh. This would explain why Ezekiel seems to have a complex view. While condemning certain idolatrous practices like the worship of Tammuz, he does not directly speak against Asherah or her associated symbols. Asherah's legacy in ancient Israel. Archaeological evidence and the Bible itself suggest that Asherah, often referred to as the Queen of Heaven, was worshipped in ancient Israel for a significant portion of its early history. Far from being a purely foreign or idolatrous influence, she was deeply embedded in Israel's religious practice. Symbols associated with her, such as divine trees and almond branches, can be found throughout the Bible, hinting at her importance. Even after the Babylonian exile, when a new temple was built, there was ongoing tension within Israel's religious leadership. While they moved toward a Yahweh-only theology, Asherah's symbols still appeared, repurposed with new meanings to fit their evolving beliefs. It's no coincidence that in early Christianity, the almond shape was later used to symbolize purity, with Christ often depicted within an almond-shaped halo, connecting these ancient traditions to newer religious interpretations. Conclusion. Asherah's influence in Israel's faith. Asherah's presence in ancient Israel's worship was significant, and the Bible does not fully erase her role. Instead, her influence lingers in the symbolism, history, and religious tensions that shaped the development of early Jewish and Christian theology. Whether viewed positively or negatively, her legacy as the wife of God and the Queen of Heaven remains an important part of understanding the evolution of Israelite religion.